presentation, please feel free to ask these, and they can also answer them at the end at the same time as Rahul and Rochana. So it is my pleasure to welcome Rebecca and Marguerite. Kia ora, over to you.
Kia ora, tina koe. O te rā he mihi nui tēnei kia koe, Caitlin. Nau anō tō tātai nei wānanga me ki tō tātai nei hui I waka tūwera I tēnei ata-ātāhua ki konei I Whanganui. Nō reira, he mihi nui tēnei kia koe. O te rā ki koutou hoki ngā kai kōrero o te rangi nei, he mihi tēnei ki koutou. Ki koutou e mātaki ana e wakarongo ana ki ngā kōrero e haere atu nei tina koutou. Ko Marguerite tēnei, he uri tēnei o Whanganui Rangitīkei Ngāti Maniapoto, e mahi ana ki Whanganui More Healthy Families, Project Manager of the co-design of the Suicide Prevention Strategy for the Whanganui District, Whanganui Ruapehu and Rangitīkei. Kia ora, tēnā tātou. I am Marguerite McGuckin, and I'm from Whanganui, from Aotearoa, and I'm from Ngāti Maniapoto, and working in Te Ranganui for Healthy Families, and as I just said, the project manager for the co-design of the Suicide Prevention Strategy for the Whanganui District. And I will now hand it over to Rebecca, who can introduce herself and start us off. Kia ora, tēnā koe, Rebecca.
Tēnā koe, Marg. Morena koutou. Ko wai au, ko Rebecca Davis tōku ingoa, he uri tēnei no Ngāti Rangiwewehi, Ngāti Parauki Haratonga, me Ngāti Te Au hoki. He impact strategist, more tēnei kaupapa or suicide prevention, me impact strategist, he impact strategist or the Change and Innovation Agency, me Healthy Families Whanganui Rangitīkei Ruapehu. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Morena koutou, and it's so nice to be here. Thank you, Healthy Families Waitakere, for inviting us into such an important kaupapa and to present the mahi that we've been doing with the suicide prevention strategy. So I'll just ask Grace if I could just share our deck, would be great, thank you, and we can get started. I think in late 2018, early 2019, the CEO of the Whanganui District Health Board, Russell Simpson, who sits on the Strategic Leaders Group for Healthy Families in the Whanganui District, wanted the suicide prevention strategy that was ready to be rewritten and redeveloped to sit in Healthy Families, and that Healthy Family would lead out the development of a strategy and an implementation plan. And he did that because he liked the philosophy and the practice of Healthy Families, where it was very much looking through a systems lens. And also that community, he was interested in what a community-led approach could be, and would we design a strategy and a prevention strategy differently. So it had all of the elements and aspects of what could be quite a transformational strategic plan. So Healthy Families since May last year has been driving out the development of the strategic approach. I'll just let Marg tell you about how that kick-started. Today we'd like to go through what's the process been that we've looked at for a whole of community, whole of systems approach. What have we discovered? And where are we at the moment, and what can the district expect in terms of a 3 to 5 year plan looking at prevention?
Kia ora, tēnā koe, Rebecca. So when I came on board last year in April of May, we started collecting our data from our community, and our community is quite a large. It's over 62,000 people within our community, Whanganui Ruapehu Rangitīkei. So we went out into our communities to collect our community voices, and we wanted to know what was happening out there, what wasn't happening out there, and how were they feeling. And we did this through different mediums of co-design workshops. We did this through peer-to-peer interviewing. We did this through empathy interviewing. We did this through surveys. We did this through going to different events in and around our region. At the end of it, we had about more than 5,000 data points to work with and to theme up and to do some data analysis with. And so when we say the community, we mean all of our community, and even with our system stakeholders as well that were part of that collection of data. And so with that, we came up with, we had 8 insights that we came out with. For our young people, they were wanting role models to support them, and because it didn't seem to be out there for them, and there's a whole culture of bullying and judgment, and they felt like that within the community, and so that was a huge insight that came out of that. Our health practitioners are not coping with the overwhelming growth and demand for mental health services out there. An example, our crisis team has 2 people working for our whole region at one time. We have 1 full-time worker and 9 part-time. So you have the 1 full-time and the 1 part-time. We can't cope with that. And also a lot of our community, when they ring the numbers, the 0800 numbers out there, they either can't get through, or that they've been referred to Monday, or they've been referred to a GP. They need someone at that time. They weren't getting that help and support at that time. And so also our communities are seeking some alternative wellbeing solutions, like connecting to their culture, and they want something that represents them, especially not even just for Māori though as well, but there's so many other people out there who are wanting a holistic approach to how they're being serviced and how they're being treated when they come to a point of entry of whatever service that looks like for them. Those are just some of the few of the insights that we were able to come up with, and that is what created or helped us frame up the framework going forward.
I think what was also, and it continues to be a real positive thing in this piece of work, is that the amount of people that are wanting to turn up and willing to turn up to be involved and engage in a prevention approach, and to share their thoughts and feelings and experiences. And when we talk about an overwhelming a sector that feels overwhelmed, that a lot of the issues that our families are dealing with, and a lot of the challenges that they're coping with and coming to the table with, are complex. So it's not a simple mental health issue. There will be many things that have compounded over a period of time that make some of these issues quite difficult. And often our whānau, our family, are arriving in the system too late. So when they're desperately in need, rather than earlier in their well-being be diminished. So the positive is that the communities are really committed to something new happening and something different happening. And number 2, really committed to having a voice and to raising awareness that there is the opportunity for a whole of community approach. The other thing that we noticed in the insights was that a lot of our young people had experienced risk factors, and so we're coming through life with multiple risk factors and experiencing toxic stress. And so we're really interested in one of the hypotheses that we came up with. So there were 8 hypotheses in the framework, and we developed a framework that allows us to socialise what it would look like to think about an end-to-end spectrum for wellbeing, and what we would change as we move from up or across that wellbeing spectrum, and what would need to be in that spectrum at that point in time, and how can we keep people moving towards high wellbeing rather than slipping down into suicide behaviour. And I just wanted to note that Marg raised the point that people are reaching out, but they're at the suicidal behaviour end of it, and that's where they're getting really a good support, but it takes quite a bit of navigating of the system to get there. Whereas we're thinking there's a lot more that could be done earlier when people are posing maybe potentially at risk. And then also that more can be done with the community to be aware of some of the signs and the risk factors that people will be showing or demonstrating that could be the community could respond to more effectively, and may not. Just lack of awareness is one of the key things that we were talking about. So I think that we did create a framework, and we held some space, and this is a space holder where we wanted to look at, well, what would be our aspirations and our vision for the future, and what would the community hope to see, and what are some of the outcomes that we would like to achieve over a short to long period of time. And this is still in process, so we're still gathering the community, the region, our community's insights and voice around what the vision for the community would be. And then also the understanding, and there are different levels of understanding of heightened wellbeing. And so it's just clarifying and gathering all of that voice to understand that, and then look at specifically what are the systems that we would like to address in the first couple of years that support people to get help when they need help, and to make it a loving approach and a caring approach rather than a clinical approach. And Marg, we can talk a little bit about how people responded to accessing the system potentially, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Rebecca talks about our communities, and I guess the huge insight if we would look at it and summarise it is that we need to strengthen our informal networks within our community, because a lot of our people actually don't even want to go to a service. But even before that, they don't actually know what it is that they want, because they don't know how to articulate their needs when they're in a place of darkness and in that space. So I think we had to also come up with 5 focus points throughout to tackle, at a time at that chunk bite sizes. So our focus is around our child health and wellbeing, recalibrating the current system, the system stakeholders, returning to Māori systems, our farmers and our rural and our tāne Māori, and with our tāne Māori, that's with our rangatahi in there as well, because that's what data shows us, but also that's coming from the insights that we were able to gather through our gathering our community voice. Sorry, Rebecca, what got off track with your question? What was your question you wanted me to answer?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
That's all good. The framework that we developed was a framework that normally you would write a strategic plan, and you would have the mission, the vision, the mission, the strategic objectives, etc. But what we knew when we came together to look at the insights and work with the different communities across the region was that a strategic plan is often very much one-dimensional and can anchor you and not give you the type of fluidity that's required in something that's really complex and can be quite difficult you've got to get involved in it and mobilize and build capacity and capability to work in this space with the community. So we're looking at a real strategic intent document, or approach, I should say, that allows the community to start somewhere. So Marg's correctly said we've got 5 areas of focus that we're really interested in, and in fact it's grown to 7 recently. But and we need to focus somewhere because we need to get some traction and momentum where we are seeing progressive wins and outcomes occur in a whole of community, whole of systems approach. So I just wanted to use the scope of operations as an example. So in our findings and in the insights, we discovered that navigating the system can be very difficult for people who are seeking help. And it can be difficult, one, because it's a difficult time to communicate their needs. Number 2, it's where to go and who to go and see, and will that person understand me and what I need at that point in time. So literally physically knowing where to go and who to reach out to. And then number 3 thing is the assessment process or the referral process tends to be quite clinical. So it's been designed through a clinical lens rather than holistic lens. So people can feel like, whilst that's difficult to communicate, that they're also not, the questions are more important than the answers. So navigating to find help is difficult to do, and then communicating at a time when you really need help is difficult to do. So we wanted to look at where would we start to focus would be that entry point if you were coming into the system. Regardless of where that entry point was, could we create an assessment? And we've called it the art of a great referral. So could we create that assessment point to be underpinned by what we saw in COVID, which was manaakitanga, aroha, that there was this kindness and caring of the whole person and that holistic nature of engagement with them, rather than a tick box process, which most people feel. And we discovered in this is that often moving around the system can compound levels of shame for people having to retell their story. So we wanted to look at the systems piece we wanted to look at in that space was the entry point, common assessment and a common narrative. Could we create shared language and shared narrative? And the same for Māori. So could we look at Māori, traditional Māori knowledge and systems and practices that promote and encourage wellbeing as ways for people to seek support and help? And so there's mahi that is already undergone or has already bubbled away and taken hold because communities are ready for this type of work. So looking at promotion, resilience and protection and prevention, as you can see in the continuum of support, and starting to build community capability and the movement that's occurring on the ground, the willingness to address some of these issues. Marg.
Can I just share, Rebecca, one of the critical learnings through this process, and especially when it came to with COVID lockdown, and that was that anxiousness is contagious within our communities. And I guess that we learned that is before we went into lockdown, everyone, and you know, those who worked in the mental health service systems all had this assumptions that suicide was going to go up, was going to increase, that domestic violence was going to increase, and all of those things were going to increase, when actually by the time we got to second, third week, it hadn't at all. Everyone was calm, and actually a lot of our waiora here became mentors for those in their own peer groups for other people, whether they was giving them a ring, but it also indicated the reciprocity of that helped them with their own well-being. And so when we come out, now that we're out of lockdown, all of that has been heightened again, you know, through all the busyness of workers as well as kaimahi, because they're stressed, and we bring that into it. And so everyone hasn't, I guess, gone into or carried on with how we were coping when we were in lockdown, and we've gone back to where we were before. And I guess if we're going on to what are we doing now and going forward, as Rebecca's just mentioned, one of the pieces of work when we were looking at recalibrating the system was the art of a great referral. And so our next, one of our exciting groups that is currently bubbling away at the moment is our Tāne Māori group, which 4 weeks ago we had our first breakfast with them. We had 15 at that one. Last week we had 20 at this one, and we've got even more men wanting to be in that space to co-design an approach going forward. But it also has given them some space to have wānanga in the first instance. What was really cool is that they came with their stories, but they also came with solutions. Also knowing that there's collectors within that group who are already doing some amazing stuff out there within our own communities, and being able to leverage and utilise off those. It was something I didn't think this movement would grow so fast, so rapidly, so quickly, because I know a lot of our Māori men here, particularly in this community, they tend to keep to themselves. But there's hope. There's hope for our rangatahi that are coming through, and for those who are mentoring, and it's just an exciting space. Our we've got people from our iwi, from those who have come out from prison, those who have work in our communities, those who just want to help, those who just want to come on board, and those who just want to be there for our community.
So I guess I'm aware of time. The to create a whole of community approach and through a systems lens in particular, and we're delighted when I met with the CEO to go, actually this type of work needs to sit in the community, not in a district health board or an institution. So at the moment, we're about to move into a space of looking at how do you backbone and support a whole of community approach. And remember, we flipped the name of this mahi to how might we grow individual and collective wellbeing. And so how do you do that from a community lens? Where should that sit? What type of model or organising structure would hold this piece of work for the next 2 or 3 years? So we're recommending a startup model in order to be able to, because this is about movement building, and this is about supporting systems, stakeholders to really take a good look at their systems that are diminishing people's well-being, and or whether they can amplify those services or systems that are enhancing and supporting whānau to get what they need earlier and to improve their own well-being. So, and then how do you create and support those informal networks or community-led initiatives that are actually getting good traction and are making a real difference at the community level? What type of support and network and joined up ecosystem do we need in order to be able to create this movement of wellbeing across a district or a region? And so the moment we're putting together a think tank that's going to look at and work with community to find out, well, where would it best sit? What are the types of practices and philosophy that's needed in a startup organisation or a backbone organisation to be able to support really good momentum and a different mindset and practices that are needed in order to be able to look through a systems lens at wellbeing, and then also look at supporting institutions and agencies to recalibrate themselves. I think one of the fortunate things about the Whanganui district is that it's got all the perfect conditions for change, and we talk about in social innovation, you've got to go where the energy is, that the conditions have to be right. And there's some really good conditions. I mean, we've leveraged the crisis, the COVID-19, by encouraging people to join the movement and think differently about what's required in order to keep people well and to enhance well-being, rather than to look at some of the stress points and to address those stress points, but the compounded weight of those stress points that people are currently experiencing. And there's just been such a willingness. So there's a real collaboration in our ecosystem of leaders coming together who are wanting to support a movement of change. There's also a real groundswell of communities wanting to take a leadership role and to innovate and use, as Marg has mentioned, other ways of creating wellbeing at a grassroots level, from culture through to social inclusion, through to more neighbourhood connectivity. And in fact, in our rural communities, they talked very much about creating more social connectedness and social inclusion. And we saw it on steroids during COVID with the response at the volunteer community level and our civil civil defence emergency teams of volunteers coming together to support their communities, to stay healthy, stay well, to ensure communication and information was transmitted and shared, and that everyone was kept in the loop. And it was, how do we replicate that? Could we recreate that and see if those models of care and inclusion could be reignited in the community and supported to ensure that people who are feeling disconnected or disengaged or are feeling high levels of severe unwellness mentally can get the type of support that they need easily, and it's trusted support that's non-judgmental. So, and we saw that truly in COVID, and we're stoked to be having people coming together and convening around the table to look at those types of approaches. And I think the other thing that Marg has been amazing at doing is being able to get into all different community groups from, we've had whānau share their stories, and we're greatly appreciative of those whānau who have had lived experience and who have been able to share where it has been challenging and difficult after they've lost someone, and how we might ensure that services to support people post-vention are visible, are readily available, are accessible in our communities. So it's that whole spectrum of help and recalibrating it so that community is at the centre, not the system at the centre.
Kia ora tēnā koe, Rebecca. Kia ora, Caitlin, and the rest of your team. I know we've come to an end, maybe over the end of our time, but kia ora, thank you for your patience. And we open the floor up for any questions that Rebecca might have to answer.
Kia ora, Marguerite and Rebecca. I loved that you talked about strengthening the informal networks within the community to help people navigate and to find help, really. So thank you for your beautiful kōrero. That was awesome, and really awesome to hear the journey of engaging with community and your vision and that whole process. If it's okay, we don't have any questions in any of the chats. We will move on to the next presentation and ask questions at the end. I hope you're all okay with that.
Great.
So I will now introduce you to Rochana and Rahul. Kia ora. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Caitlin. E mana e na reo, e rau rangitīrama. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko India te whanua, ko Kerala te rohe, ko Nādamburum te iwi, toko iwi, ko Chambra Peak te maonga, ko Kutiari te awa. He tangata tautoko aho ki te tiriti. I'm a husband to a forgiving wife, a father of 2 wonderful children, and lucky enough to be the chair of a wonderful organisation called Belong Aotearoa. Ko Rahul Watson Govindan aho, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm just going to bring up a presentation. I realised through Rebecca and Marguerite's presentation there's a lot there to take on, and so in our presentation we are going to be rattling through a number of different slides, and there will be a lot to take on in ours as well. Please do pop in your questions into the chat. No question is too dumb. Our greatest challenge was to decide what to leave out of our presentation, because there's a lot there. So that being said, I'll just bring up our presentation. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. Thumbs up if you can. Yep, cool. So today we wanted to talk a little bit about what it says there, systems change in action, but both from a operations perspective as an organisation, but also myself representing the governance side of the organisation as well. Many years ago, we had an organisation called the Auckland Regional Migrant Services Trust set up in 2002. It was set up by the regional councils at that time. Aucklanders will remember that we had more than one council not so long ago. And it was set up to address the needs of newcomers and migrant communities in the region, and work with service providers to help those newcomers and migrant communities flourish in the Auckland region. And we were financially supported by central government and also by non-government funders, grant-making organisations, some of which we've listed there, some of whom have stayed with us on this journey over the last few years of evolving into Belong Aotearoa as well. And we undertook a range of activities. I won't go through them so much, but there was a number of service-oriented activities that we did as part of ARMS. But it's really important to recognise as an organisation the context in which you operate in. And Auckland was rapidly changing in front of our eyes. We need to understand the environment which we're operating in. Some of the stats there, the demographic stats there, you can see how they've rapidly changed from 2006 to 2013 to 2018, and Auckland is changing still. And we realise in that sort of context that, okay, well, we are working with newcomers in this changing city, and given that we're working with newcomers in this region, we needed to understand how our region and a context environment in which we're working in is changing before us. So we went out to the communities in which we were operating in, as well as our peer organisations that were also working with those communities, to understand our context better. So part of the review was interviewing current and former clients, if you like, the organisations that we were working with, and the organisations that we weren't working with, that we'd like to work with, or we thought were impacting on the experiences of newcomers to Auckland. And some of the quotes that you see on the screen came out of that review. One of the main takeaways from the review was that there was a sense of fragmentation, that the migrant, ethnic, and former refugee sector was not united. There was a lot of fragmentation, a lot of competition for funding and resources, and a lot of dilution of impact. And it wasn't just we were here, it wasn't just us that were hearing it, it was also confirmed by other organisations, including Foundation North and the research that they did into the diversity policy. And the findings from a review included a sense of, or a lack of regional strategy in the sector. There was a lack of coordination, a need to share good practice, but there wasn't a lot of sharing going on. And there was a need for an advocacy role to promote and support policy advice going to central and regional government around diversity and inclusion, but also the experiences of newcomers. And a need to gather and disseminate research and insights and incubate some of the ideas in response to that data that we were generating. So all of that sort of combined insight and research work that we did contributed towards a feeling that we needed to change. And if we didn't change, we risked becoming irrelevant. You also needed to have, I suppose, some of the other ingredients for change prevalent. So the environment change, there was a digitalization of information of our lives. There is a prevalence of, I suppose, a lot of information online and available digitally, but excluded from many newcomers. And where included, there was a heck of a lot of noise, not a lot of signal for them. Funders were frustrated. I'm generalizing, I guess there, but they prefer to deal with one organisation as opposed to multiple. And as with any massive shift is when a major customer or a major funder vacates, and in our case, our funding with central government stopped, and our contracts were not renewed. And so we really needed to change. The other ingredients, we had Rochana join us as a new chief executive. I started my tenure as chair, and we had some new trustees join us as well. And then, all the insights that we gathered, you don't have to read the content of the slide so much here, but it's really important that when you start gathering insights, that you start to theme up your insights in an actionable way. Sometimes you just end up, many of you have run workshops or facilitated workshops, you'll empathize with, going home with a bunch of sticky notes in your backpack. And what we didn't want to end up with was a lot of insights and not a lot of ways in which to take advantage of the insights and learn from them and action them. So we started to categorize across some important categories some of the insights that we had gained. And this process, I suppose, that we went on, really it sort of just basically enabled us to re-establish ourselves as Belong Aotearoa. It shifted all our thinking. Instead of thinking of what services we can produce or offer, we began to reframe our thinking around, how can we solve some of the persistent barriers of forced settlement for newcomers? What are they? How do we articulate them? Some of this was mind shift oriented. How do we keep going? Some of the things that we're doing. But how do we retire things which are not making a long-term impact? And really importantly, we asked ourselves, what would it look like in 10 years from now if newcomers were not crushed by the same persistent pain points? And that really allowed us and freed us as an organization to spend the rainy day cash that we've been accruing over the years, and give us a real drive and momentum for change. You see there that we've got a new branding and new colours, and some of the values that we espouse now are inclusion, connection, wellbeing, and I think it's a reflection of the huge amount of work and research that we put into changing as an organisation. This is familiar, well, not so much as quickly line stuff, but the impact model is a familiar model for many of you. But it's sort of articulate that change is not a linear progression, it's complex. It does get messy at times, but that's okay, that's normal. I guess you have to accept that being the norm and try and work out your role within it to try and understand the problem really clearly. And one of the ways in which we do that as an organisation, and I recommend to all of you, is to have a framework to guide your work that sort of articulates the most important things for you. So in our framework, we understood the context, and we articulate the context in a really clear way. The key role of any strategy is clarity. So this framework provides us as a board and also as an executive with clarity. So what is our context? Let's articulate it across a number of bullet points. And what are the core activities that we're going to do within that context? And how do we measure our impact, both in the short as well as the long term, so that we know that we're making a difference and we continue to be relevant in the context in which we're operating, and the core activities we're up to in that context is making a difference. Over to you, Rochana.
Kia ora, Rahul, thank you. So really, this is when a strategic plan meets operation, and we're trying to think what and how do we stop doing what we've always done, and even when we haven't got the funds to do what we are currently doing, you can't change the behavior. It's really, really hard to change organizational behavior. You've got this new roadmap in front of you, this evolving path, but your DNA is hardwired to the old service-driven way of an organization. And it wasn't like we had a fresh piece of paper. We were dealing with a piece of paper that had crinkles on it, rubbed out lines. It was challenging and sometimes still is. So taking our impact model to help with the changes, and through the convening that we were doing, we identified 4 key areas that we decided we'd work on. And one was around representation, underemployment, racism and discrimination, culturally responsive services. And I remember after the review talking to Rahul and saying, if no one believes in this new way that we want to work to address some of the systemic challenges to the settlement arena, we'll have to close our doors, because none of us believe that we could still keep doing what we've done, because you just keep getting the same results. And we were fortunate that we received the funding and we employed 2 dedicated systems change activators. So our work is not about us leading all areas, it's about supporting the areas and seeing who we can work with to help create a system change of settlement that has an overarching sense of belonging. And these were some of the calls to action that came out of meetings that we've had and in discussions, and this helps guides our work as well. So 1 year on, we've changed a lot, but of course we're still learning. So we're not so service driven. We are looking at the way we test ideas. For example, at the moment we're looking into an internship program for secondary visa holders, particularly our work around the diverse voice in policy making. How do we bring that voice alive? How do we get that penetrated into government decision making? But through that work we did, where we brought in people for the first time into one room that had never been in a room, government, business, NGO, etc. There's this real willingness to look at the way that we could even change the representation that's on statutory boards and how we can work together. And I think one of the things that we've done is reach outside our immediate circle. So we're also working on a social media campaign that will be launched later in August called #PassTheMic. And we're working with people that we wouldn't perhaps have worked with the service-driven lens on. So the next slide, please. Yeah, through the convening and bringing people together over the past year, we've developed our on-the-ground research reports, our feasibility reports, collecting of different voices, and then seeing how we can help amplify those community voices. These pieces of work also guide our work to address the persistent issues that have been facing communities that we work with. The challenges working in this way, of course there's challenges. One I'm going to focus on, and people who know me on this call will have heard me going on about it, is the difficulties of collaboration. It's survival versus collaboration, often it comes down to. And for me, being part of the collective leadership in this movement that we're trying to do, I've had to personally change my own mindset. So in the past, I've had very clear instructions for people I work for to go it alone. It's quicker, it's less messy, and if we can succeed on a contract without having to collaborate with anyone, then it's more bangs for bucks, you know? However, my thinking now is, how impactful might it be if we join with others? What might that look like? What could diversity of thinking, if you're bringing these different people together into the space to disrupt the present system, and how the long-term impact might have on the communities that we serve? So how can we get out of this competitive mind frame and working with others into a safe, disruptive model mindset? Still working on that area. And you know, like last week, we had a room of 84 people all wanting some systems change for communities that they serve, the marginalized migrants, former refugees. And the area I thought would have most lasting impact was just in the too hard basket. It would mean that people would have to go up against government, against funders, and it just seemed too hard. So how can we address some of those challenges? The next slide, please. you know, being open and honest. What does collaboration look like? What does it mean when you're wanting to build a movement of change, and it involves working at the different levels of the system? So if you think about the waters or systems change and the resources, the flow of resources or policies, to be able to work at that level in that systemic improvement of maintaining competency, on the slide here, the bottom corner, in that area, if you're working with others, you're putting them at risk of their contracts, you're putting them at risk around the livelihood of the people that work with them, for them. So whether it's, and I've also started, and we at work and others have started to play around with the words, you know, is it collaboration? Are we talking about alliedship? What does that mean? How does that feel differently? Coalition. But basically, this part of our system change really needs to be resourced. Otherwise, we'll still keep getting the same pathways. We're still, the wheels just keep turning, and we won't find the new pathways. We're just picking up shiny new objects along the way. And, you know, one glove, one way does not fit all the causes. So I think we're coming to the end. We've got our last slide here. And sorry, Caitlin, if you put the 2-minute slide up, I couldn't, I've been so focused on my slides here. But yeah, so this brings us, to the end of our presentation. And our final comments was around how we're, as well as attempting to change the systems which our communities work in, and which we, our staff with our lived experiences have, that addressing some of the dynamics within our own organisation internally. And our leadership development, what could that look like? The collaborative internal leadership. So it's not just one voice, and often in the NGO, it's always the CEO's voice. But how do we have that collaborative leadership between the board and operations? And we're not keeping each other at arm's length, but understanding the need for togetherness at the same time separation, and how you develop the collaborative leadership within operational team. And, you know, the picture up here, the theories of systems leadership, the words that they use there are coalition building, advocacy, tactics, collaboration, leadership. And I guess that's where we are, as well as working externally, is also internally. How is our practice changing, and the collaborative leadership skills within the team? Rahul, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, I'll just say, from a board chair perspective, you would have noted a couple of slides ago around challenges. I noted that governance is the same, but it's different, in that it's less about oversight of operations and more about oversight of impact and purpose. And there are many tools like, you know, Lumio and a few others that we're using from a operations and governance perspectives to help us move conversations at board meetings along to be more strategic in nature. But in between those board meetings, we have a constant communication between myself and Rochana. There's a clear understanding between what is operational decision making and up to her to decide, and what is governance decision making and ultimately up to the board to decide. But there's some clarity of intent and transparency in the conversations there that doesn't muddy the waters too much. There's also a good level of communication between myself and the vice chair, so that it's not just intellectual capital that's just built up between myself and the CE, but also shared with you know, the other parts of with the vice chair and other members of the board as well, so that there is an understanding of how we're tracking as an organisation in terms of our impact and overall purpose. I'll end there. There's, as I said at the start, our greatest challenge was to decide what to leave out without diluting the story too much. So hopefully there's a lot of questions there. There's a lot of insight there that we're happy to share. So thanks. Over to you, Caitlin.
Oh, thank you. Kia ora, Rahul. Kia ora, Rochana, thank you for sharing this massive piece of work that's still ongoing, especially your learnings. I love that you were changing with as an organisation as the environment was changing as well, and also Rochana, that you had to make changes or personally change your own mindset as well, which is really encouraging to hear. We do have a few questions here, and I'll ask the questions for Belong Aotearoa first. The first one was, what do you mean by newcomers? If you just want to please revisit your term, the newcomers, for everyone, please.
Rahul, do you want to do that one? You were
Okay.
probably around when we started introducing that word.
Yeah, look, I think my background entirely has been, not entirely, but largely has been in the private sector, and I'm a chief executive of a software company now, and I've been there in the past. And one of the key things we talk about is focus and understanding your customer and understanding customer segments and focusing on a certain type of segments. And the more niche you can be, more successful, more chance of success you have. So there's a lot of, I guess, corporate strategic thinking around this. But in the social space, it wasn't really clear to me. I mean, I'm a migrant. You know, I came here when I was 4, and I guess I didn't come here by myself. It wasn't my choice. My parents brought me here. But was ARMS at that time, or Belong Aotearoa, is it set up to work with me? Not so much. I'm less of a migrant and more of a New Zealander, so I don't need the support services of an organisation like Belong Aotearoa anymore. But in the old definition of working with migrants, well, I'm also a migrant. There are many migrants who have come from Australia or communities and countries around the world which are more akin to our culture here in New Zealand, or closer to our New Zealand culture than others. And they integrate well, and their sense of belonging and settlement in New Zealand is a faster process, perhaps. So we had a lot of debate about who it is that we exist for. The key common traits that I guess were that they needed to be new to the New Zealand experience, the New Zealand culture and the New Zealand environment. They needed to have attributes which made them and somewhat vulnerable in that new environment, particularly around accessibility, sense of settlement, sense of belonging, and their capacity and capability to thrive in this new country that they find themselves in. So the catch-all word, and perhaps I haven't really done justice to all the conversations we had around it, but the most comfortable word that we could find for a most focused group of folks that we wanted to work with was newcomers.
Oh, kia ora, Rahul. It's always good to think about our terminology, and especially our words, isn't it? We had 2 similar questions actually, which was, do you know if any newcomers experience higher levels of mental illness and suicide rates? Or any information around that?
Oh, that's one for you, Rochana.
I was going to, I think, I don't know compared to the rest of the population, but our services definitely, there we go, services, moving from the service to the systems, have been around that sense of isolation, which in itself has a mental health well-being concerns. And one of the outcomes that we see is more positive, people living more positively and really having that sense of belonging. So I'm not sure on what percentage it might be more than, say, the rest of the population. There does exist, I've just got a hot text through from my support team here. There does exist research with particular ethnic groups which make up our audience, but I couldn't give you those exact details.
Oh, kia ora, thank you. And one more question. I wondered how you work closely with Māori, mana whenua and mātā waka in developing a mutual understanding and design of the framework. What were some of the challenges and learnings?
Yeah, so I'll give I'll start the answer, and Rochana, maybe you can fill in the gaps. that's really important to me, both personally as a chair, as well as I think and certainly as the organisation. I felt that was one area that the previous version of the organisation and Auckland Regional Migrant Services Trust didn't do very well at governance level and strategic level. Operationally, we had Treaty o Waitangi workshops and visits to the marae, and so I felt like we were making an effort without really understanding what sort of impact we wanted to make, and we weren't necessarily building any relationships there either. And so when we went through that strategic change work all those months ago, we had conversations with local iwi. I had some conversations here. I'm based in Wellington, and I had some conversations here with Te Puna Kokiri about whether there are frameworks in place that we could utilise to inform these pieces of work that we're up to and the strategic change we're up to. It was fair to say that for many, it was a pioneering conversation. It was a new conversation, and my reflection personally. Well, before I share that, one other thing, last year when we also hosted a hui, which perhaps you might want to talk a little bit more about, Rochana, when I hand over, with Te Whanau Aotearoa, talking a little bit about this as well in a bit more detail. But for me personally, it's a reflection on the journey that New Zealand is going on in terms of New Zealand identity, the place of mana whenua within New Zealand identity, the place of te reo, the usage of it, the place and the preeminence of the Treaty o Waitangi as a founding document in New Zealand, and what it means to call oneself a New Zealander. And if you are going to belong in a country called New Zealand, how do you furnish yourself with the education, knowledge, and capability in te reo and te ao Māori, so that you feel connected to both the current New Zealand as we see it, but also the journey of New Zealand and the history of New Zealand with Māori. And so that's something that I reflect on quite a lot, and it's something that us as a board and organisation, we are sympathetic and empathetic to, but we don't presume to have solved the answer, and I'm always happy to be challenged, and us as an organisation to be challenged on improving and building more partnerships, relationships with iwi and Māori for sure. Anything else there, Rochana?
I won't. I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, kia ora, thank you. We did just actually have one question for Rebecca and Marguerite, which was around replicating your initiative in high schools, or is it more important in different locations? I noticed that Rebecca did actually answer the question. So if you have anything else to add, we have 1 more minute, and then you can add it. Otherwise, if you're happy for Kathy to get in touch with you.
I just wanted to add that you run the risk, if you just have it in a high school, you run the risk they're going to one environment and then out into another environment. So it is really important to have the community approach. Not saying you shouldn't do it in the high school, but you need to have they're going from their whānau, which there's toxic stress, and then they go into the high school and there's some support systems there, then they come out of it again into their whānau or into the community, then it, there's that, you just run that risk of doing that. So the whole of community approach in this instant, especially for suicide, to reduce suicide and to increase the wellbeing is really important.
Yeah.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Marguerite. Okay. Ngā mihi kia koutou. Katoa mō tō tautoko. Thank you to all of you who have participated today. Thank you so much to our speakers. Kia ora, big mihi to you all. I'll close us with a karakia. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tau tātou ariki, a iu karaiti ni te aroha, mi te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, amene.
Amene.
Kia ora, everyone.
Kia ora, thank you.